G'day. A question that I've discussed with quite a number of members this year as someone who participates in general service in AA Australia is this. When members get together from GSRs down, are they autonomous AA groups? Enjoying the autonomy that AA groups who sit at the top of our structure enjoy? And the answer clearly is no. And this video explores why that is using AA literature. Okay, so it starts with Tradition 3. I'm not going to read all of it. I'm going to highlight the description of what makes an AA group an AA group, which is simply this. Any 2 or 3 alcoholics gathered together for what? For sobriety may call themselves an AA group. Now, I don't know about you. I've never been to a district meeting or an area assembly. I've never been on a conference working group where any 12-stepping has gone on. We don't meet for sobriety. We meet to do things that support the groups at the top of our structure to do their work when they meet for sobriety. So, if you're meeting to discuss public information, a campaign for posters, or if you're meeting at an area assembly to cover what's going on in AA as a whole and talk about the topics, you're not meeting for sobriety. You're not 12-stepping anyone. What you're doing is committee work that supports the groups at the top of a structure who do meet for sobriety. And so that's how it works. The AA groups are the engine room, and all those 5 levels you can see there below support them. And as we know, those 5 levels from GSR down to the board and the GSO, we are there as the trusted servants to be accountable to the groups. So service and accountability always go up. So if you want to actually have the most service and accountability in AA, become a board member. You have to serve and be accountable to all 5 levels above you. Whereas obviously it often starts with being a GSR because we are simply the servant to one group, and it's a great testing ground for more service and accountability as we go lower and lower on the structure. And of course, where does our authority come from? Why are we trustedly serving the groups? Because the groups are the ultimate authority. And they use their authority delegated down. So in fact, I'm an area delegate at the moment, and I don't have my own authority. The authority I have in my role is delegated down from the groups in my area, and that's how it works. So we don't have our own authority at these lower levels. We have a group authority which they've delegated to us by voting us into these sorts of positions. And that's how AA's worked ever since we've had a structure. It's a very cool thing. So these trusted servants to the AA groups, as such, cannot be AA groups themselves. You cannot be the servant and the master or ultimate authority simultaneously. So we need to know our place. We need to know from GSRs down, we are servants. And we have been entrusted with authority that only comes from the top level of our structure. And therefore, decision-making works in a different way. So, in particular, these trusted servants from districts down make decisions that consider and impact more than one AA group. And this is where Tradition 4 and this idea of group autonomy starts to become very difficult to apply. And that makes seeing themselves, these 4 levels at the bottom, as autonomous groups themselves, workably impossible. It's just impossible to do, and here's why. It's how Tradition 4 actually reads. So as we know, Tradition 4 is the one that outlines autonomy. Only in the short form, I might add. In the long form, you will notice the word autonomy does not exist. But it's the second sentence that becomes very salient here. When its plans concern the welfare of neighbouring groups, also those groups ought to be consulted. So there is not a single notion in AA that autonomy means groups can do whatever they want in isolation. As soon as its decision impacts another group, a neighbouring group, they must have a chat to that group. And this is why we often misunderstand the idea of autonomy. It doesn't mean that we're an island. It means the opposite of that. We're only an island until we impact someone else, and then we must have a chat. If district meetings, area assemblies, conference meetings and the board were all autonomous groups, there'd always be in constant breach of Tradition 4 every time they decided anything, unless they consulted all the groups they're impacting. I mean, I would suggest every decision ever made by the board or conference in some way impacts another group. I would suggest the majority of decisions that conference and the board make impact every group in AA Australia. So it doesn't make any sense at all to say that they're an autonomous group, because they'd have to just consult. And that's not workable. Nothing would get done. In fact, if you read the first two concept essays and why we have a general service structure, Bill W. is making the point we only have a general service structure because such a situation is just not tenable. We need to be able to make decisions reasonably efficiently, and therefore group autonomy cannot apply. So if GSRs down are not autonomous, do they have any ability to make decisions for themselves? Well, welcome to the 12 concepts and the general service structure of AA Australia. Of course they do. It doesn't work the same as group autonomy. It in fact works a lot better. What am I talking about? Yes, of course they do. And it's concept 3. It says, to ensure effective leadership, we should endow each element of AA, the conference, and that of course is what you're seeing there. That's our conference. There's the conference meeting in November, and that's an event. But what we're seeing here is the General Service Conference of AA Australia, that each element of AA, the conference, the General Service Board, and its service corporation, staffs and committees and executives. Thank God we don't have a grapevine here. That would just make things more complex. We only have a GSO with the traditional right of decision. So we have a right of decision, which is not the same as group autonomy. What ultimately the right of decision boils down to is this. If you're a service position holder, GSR down, know your service position and responsibilities as defined in conference approved materials, and then decide for yourself as a trusted servant. This is your right of decision. Decide for yourself as a trusted servant when to take things up the structure for advice and support and when not to. So for example, as an area delegate, I may seek the advice of the DCM at district or the GSRs at an area assembly. I may email them in between assemblies going, what do you think I need clarity on this? I did it today. I did it an hour ago on a matter that's come up. Or I can make a decision for myself because that's why I'm in the position. I'm trusted to exercise discretion when to consult and report back to members above me, groups and committees above me, and when I can decide things for myself. That's the whole point. Now, this is, if you like, perhaps an equivalent to group autonomy at the top level, but it means that consultation is up to me and therefore things get done more efficiently. But there is a caveat. We need to understand that we have a position and that we don't exceed. So one of the core ideas, know your service position and responsibilities as defined in conference approved materials. We need to know when it's not appropriate for us to even look at deciding something because it's beyond our role. So what the concept essay, I'm just picking 2 sections that really summarize this. The concept 3 essay says, within the framework of their general responsibilities, whether these are defined by character, by resolution, in other words, advisory actions, or by custom, it should be the traditional right of all world service boards, committees, executives to decide which problems they will dispose of themselves and upon which matters they will report, consult, and ask specific questions. I would point out that we do this within the framework of our role, no matter how it's defined. And this is the difference. We get to exercise this right of decision, whether to consult or not, very much within what has been approved at conference, what's written in our service literature, like the manual and the guidelines. It follows. We ought to trust our responsible leaders to decide, so GSR's down, to decide within the understood framework of their duties. Could that not read clearer? There has to be an understood in other words, shared framework of their duties, how they will interpret and apply their own authority and responsibility to each particular problem or situation as it arises. This sort of leadership discretion should be the essence of right of decision. And I am certain that this is Bill W. talking, I am certain that we need not have the slightest fear of granting this indispensable privilege at nearly every level of world service. So if we understand the framework of our duties, and of course that framework has to be written down, so the GSRs, the groups who vote position holders into those positions, go, well, okay, I've read the manual, I know what I'm voting about. We're giving you this task. You could be a conference committee, you could be a board member, you could be working at area or district committee level. We've read the manual. We know what your role is, and we trust you to do that. And within that shared and agreed to position, you have the authority to come to us or not. So there's a real checks and balances thing going on. So in terms of that, deciding for ourselves as a trusted servant when to take things up the structure, I think the second last paragraph of the essay reads really great. This right of decision should never be made an excuse for failure to render proper reports of all significant actions taken. So we don't do backdoor deals. We don't do things behind anyone's back. We need to report transparently. It's how we build and create trust. It ought never be used as a reason for constantly exceeding a defined, clearly defined authority. In other words, if it has not been written, you don't do it. Our role is defined by what is on the page in the guidelines and the manual, for example, in the literature that is conference approved. Exceeding it is making something up that's never been passed at conference, for example. It just doesn't make sense. Nor is an excuse for persistently failing to consult those who are entitled to be consulted before an important decision or action is taken. And so we have this beautiful spirit of, okay, you could be an area delegate or a DCM, or a committee. Yes, you can make decisions without consulting with the GSRs, those above in the structure, but why would you? Who wants to be back at, in the early page 60s of the big book going, oh, you know what? I'm the well-intentioned actor running the show again. We need to be beyond that. And so here we're given this instruction, which I think does boil down to, you know your position as it reads and do it. And, consult where you feel or your higher power feels you need to. And this is this beautiful thing when information is shared, but also when people are trusted, we get things done in AA, and it's a beautiful thing. So in summary, only AA groups at level 1 practice the type of autonomy mentioned in Tradition 4. Even then, if their decision impacts other groups, there needs to be consultation. As such, members who get together at levels 2 to 6 can't practice autonomy. They are not AA groups. It's just not workable. The level of consultation required would make getting things done impossible. It's why we have a general service structure in the first place. Instead, they get to practice concept 3, right of decision. This takes knowing but never exceeding your clearly defined authority. This is why the service manual and guidelines are so thick. By the way, to define authority takes a whole bunch of words. And on that note, I hope that's been clarifying in some ways. We need to be efficient and spiritual at all levels of our structure, and thank God for the concept essays and our democratic rights, which do include the right of decision. And I wish you a happy sober day.